Well, China is always in the news. It's in the news for a lot of reasons: military, economic, political. And in Canada's case, there's some national security concerns. As you know, I was curious about the strange way that Canada's new Prime Minister was selected. The Liberal Party had an online-only voting system. People as young as 14 were allowed to vote. Foreign nationals were allowed to vote. 400,000 people were registered to vote, but 250,000 of those 400,000 were disqualified, and we never really got an explanation for that. I posed the question with no answer. Could it be that the People's Liberation Army hackers were able to penetrate the Liberal Party's system? I have no basis that they did, other than it's quite curious to me that a majority of registered voters were disqualified, and the results in the end were bizarrely uniform. In every district in the country, Mark Carney won by approximately the same amount, even in the home districts of his rivals, such as Chrystia Freeland. That's just an observation. I don't have a conclusion to make because there were no complaints filed. That's been different over the last few weeks as the government itself, the agency tasked with detecting foreign interference, has on several occasions held emergency news conferences saying that the Chinese Communist Party has been targeting conservative candidates, including with propaganda drives using the WeChat app, popular with Chinese Canadians. There was a remarkable case when Paul Chang, a Liberal Party candidate in the Greater Toronto area, said, half-jokingly he claims, but said it 3 times, that a conservative Chinese Canadian candidate was wanted in Beijing. And if anyone were to kidnap him and bring him to the Chinese consulate, they would receive a reward of 1 million Hong Kong dollars. He was replaced, but only after Mark Carney stood by him. His successor, by some measures, even worse. What does China see in Canada? What does China see in our Prime Minister, Mark Carney? Joining us now to talk about that, and just as important, the Chinese-U.S. tariff war, is our friend Gordon G. Chang, who I say is the most interesting and best informed analyst of China out there today. What a pleasure to see you again, Gordon. I know you're so busy. Thanks for jamming us in.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Ezra. I really appreciate it.
Now, Canada has been dealing with China issues for a long time. The two diplomats who were taken, Canada would say, hostage by China for years. China just put a massive tariff on Canadian canola crops. There's always something afoot in Canada. Pull the camera back a bit. What does China see in Canada? What would be the prize for China that motivates them to meddle in our democracy?
There are so many prizes. So, for instance, the Arctic. China wants to dominate the Arctic with its new best friend, Russia. But also remember, Canada is part of the Five Eyes. It would love to have some intel on what was being discussed. Canada borders the United States, the world's longest undefended border. And we know that that border is troublesome. In federal fiscal FY24, which ended on September 30, 2024, the number of terrorist watch list suspects coming in across the northern border far exceeded those coming in across the undefended southern border. There were 155 on the terror watch list apprehended coming from Mexico. There was 358, Ezra, coming from Canada. And that shows there is an infiltration problem. We know that various U.S. administrations, Biden, Trump, have talked to Ottawa about all these problems, and a lot more of them, by the way, and have generally received a cold reception. This is not a good story from the United States point of view, because although we always think of Canada as close friends, nonetheless, we do know that the Trudeau government allowed hostile elements to use Canada as a staging ground for assaults on the U.S. And oh, by the way, where was the world's largest fentanyl lab? No, it wasn't in China. No, it wasn't in Mexico. It was in Vancouver.
Wow. You know, that terrorist statistic is one I bet most Canadians don't know. We know that ordinary migrants. Obviously, that Mexican border was much larger an issue, but for, like you say, those terrorist suspects on the watch list. Hey, I got one last question for you about Mark Carney before we move on to U.S. tariffs. Mark Carney was the head of, I call it a mini BlackRock. It was called Brookfield, and it had about $1 trillion under management, which is pretty big. And Carney met with Xi Jinping, and he had a lot of dealings in China. If I'm being really, really fair, if I'm trying to see things from Carney's point of view, he would say none of my business deals were illegal. They all followed the law. We were told to go out and earn a rate of return for our investors. China has high rates of return. If you're not in that growing global market, you're nowhere. So if I was hired as a lawyer to defend his dealings with China, I would say, look, it's the world's biggest economy. If you doubt it, go into your Walmart and try and find something not made in China. Shouldn't he have sought the rate of return for his investors? A critic would say, well, you were exposed to China, you favored China, you are doing China, you're seeking errands, you're running errands for them. What's your take? I mean, it's pretty rare for a businessman to actually meet one-on-one with Xi Jinping and to get a $250 million loan from China. Or is that just business the way it is these days?
Well, if you ask Hunter Biden, I guess you'd say that's just business the way that it is. Couple things. The returns from China have really been poor recently, and basically this entire decade. So I'm not so sure that that's a good investment on the part of anybody. And really what we're talking about is China gaining leverage with someone who's the prime minister of a NATO member and Five Eyes partner, and which just happens to share a very long border with the U.S. So this is not business as usual. And I think that this is a disqualifying element in Mark Carney's run for a new election. I mean, a new 5-year term.
Yeah.
But I'm just a foreigner, so you don't have to listen to me.
Well, I think, but you know China better than anyone else I know.